Good afternoon and welcome to our session on front of package labelling, and I've got a wonderful panel with me today. I'm Cameron Abbasi, Editor-in-Chief of the BMJ, and I have Dr. Ghida Al-Jabouri, Senior Scholar, O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. We have Dr. Faisal Al-Damadi, who's the Assistant Minister for Hospital Affairs, Saudi Arabia. We have Professor Sally Davis, who's the former Chief Medical Officer of the UK, and also Master of Trinity College. And we have Dr. Luz Maria de Regil, who's the unit head of the multi-sectoral actions in food systems for the WHO. So globalization has facilitated near universal access to unhealthy food products. And we need to dissect that because that's shifted traditional dietary patterns to increase consumption of processed and ultra-processed foods and beverages. And there's paper after paper being published on the harmful effects of processed and ultra-processed foods and beverages. We need to understand how brand recognition plays into that. Advertising, marketing strategies drive the increase in consumption of energy-dense and nutrient-poor foods across the global population. So this panel will discuss how front-of-package labelling, so that's food labels that provide easy-to-understand information on nutrition, how that stands out among the priority measures to tackle the consumption of unhealthy diets and, of course, to tackle the burden of non-communicable diseases. And we'll bring this back to how such a system might work in countries like Qatar. So, first of all, a round of questions for our panel. I'll begin with Dr. Ghida Al-Jabouri. So to set the stage, and you've authored a policy report on this, so congratulations. Can you briefly walk us through what a front-of-package labelling system is and some of the most common labelling schemes in use?
Yes, thank you so much. So we did just publish a paper, and we focused on maybe what Qatar could learn from this as an experience. And front-of-package food labeling is basically exactly what it says, which is a label at the front of the package of a food that gives you a little bit of the nutritional information. And this is meant to guide people into healthier choices when they're making food selections. There are about 4 different systems, but they can fall into about 4 categories. One is an endorsement system, which Sweden uses, for example, and you'll see like a check mark or a green label that says this is healthy. Another one is a traffic light system, which the UK uses, which says whether you should stop or go, or depending on how, on whether there's fats or sugars or salts, and it helps you also guide your decision making. Another system is a scaled system. It's a summary indicators, which gives you almost a grading, A, B, C, D, E, and it shows you if the food product is A for thumbs up or E for not healthy. And then the last system, which we end up endorsing in the paper, is a warning label system, which just says high in fat or high in sugar or excess, and it kind of acts like a stop sign. And we have found that Chile does this, and Israel's really recently adopted it as well. It's an easy-to-use mechanism versus a lot of information on the front of a package. But these are all labeling systems that are meant to help you make better choices when it comes to food, and it's part of it feeds into the bigger picture of how do we combat obesity and how do we combat non-communicable diseases.
So just to ask you about, there are many different systems. Is that a good or a bad thing? I mean, is it a good thing because different systems work in different cultural settings, or should we try and have one standard approach?
Yeah. So, what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. I think each country needs to assess what best works for its population and its demographic. I think, but what we want to have and see across the different systems is something that's user-friendly and that can be understood across ages, across education, levels of education, and help promote what the objective of this is, which is to make a good decision about the product.
Okay, good, thank you. Just to say, after the round of questions from the panel, we do want questions from the audience, so be ready and I'll come to you and hopefully we'll have a very interactive session. Next I'm going to Dr. Luge. With your experience from WHO, what types of labels are most effective in driving consumers towards healthier choices? That's what we want, healthier choices. And are there any gold standard examples that we should be looking to?
So thanks for the invitation. I think that I will start by saying that it's a great report. So if you are interested in the topic, read it because it clearly outlines all the schemes, some of the evidence behind it, and most importantly, the implications for selecting a particular option. The evidence is, I would say, consistent in most of the cases. All of the 4 schemes that were mentioned reduce purchase. That's what we want. And the evidence, we can look at the individual purchase of nutrients. I mean, we buy foods, but at the end, there are foods that have higher content on sodium or sugar, etc. And all of them, when you look at purchase, yes, they reduce the buying of foods, and particularly harmful ingredients. However, the warning scheme generates like this aha moment in the consumer, where is it good or not? But I would say that all the schemes require education, and you were talking about the local context. In order for them to be effective, they need 2 criteria from my perspective. One is that the industry actually understands the criteria behind them, so the labels actually report accurately what is in the food. And the second, from the consumer perspective, it requires that consumers understand it, that they understand why the warning is not that we are saying that this food is terrible, but just be warned that if you eat too much of this food, it will increase the consumption of unhealthy ingredients on your diet. So, yeah, contextualization is critical, education is critical to ensure the effectiveness of the schemes.
Good, thank you. You said there's evidence that these schemes reduce purchasing. Is there any evidence that they actually impact and improve health outcomes? Presumably those studies are quite hard to do.
Yes, it's a series of steps, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There is evidence that if you reduce the purchase, then you reduce the intake, and if you reduce the intake, you reduce some cardiovascular risk or health risks, and then you can prevent some communicable diseases. But it's a series of steps. It's very difficult and to measure from the purchase to your health. Yeah. It's very difficult, but all the steps are modeled. I just wanted to, if you allow me, WHO is updating the best buys for preventing of non-communicable diseases. Okay. Yeah. And all the evidence has been reviewed, and exactly the steps that you are talking about are being transparently communicated in a chain, yep. So we can assess properly the impact.
When is that coming out?
I think it is in the second stage of consultation, so it should be ready by, we're in October, so by the end of the year. I don't know exactly the date, but it's coming. It's been consulted broadly among countries and NGOs. Even the private sector has been given the opportunity to comment. Okay,
we look forward to seeing that. Dr. Faisal Al-Damadi, Saudi Arabia is one of the only countries in the region with a front-of-package labelling system. Have you seen tangible benefits since the introduction of the scheme that you have?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is one of the leading countries worldwide in the prevalence of the non-communicable diseases, which can alone cause and explain 73% of the mortality in the country. Huge, so we have to face it. We have to tackle it through a system and regime that all of the governmental entities work hardly to face it. In 2018, Saudi Food and Drug Authority, Saudi FDA, launched a program or a strategy. We called it a Healthy Food Strategy, which consists of lots of initiatives to reform the healthy food in the country. For example, I can list 5 of the strategies that embedded, implemented since that time, and now we are seeing the result of it. So, send tax for the carbonated drinks, energy drinks, putting a threshold or a requirement threshold that not to be exceeded for the sodium in the breads and other products, as well as encouraging and mandating, putting the front package labeling on the food, as well as trying to make sure that every single kitchen or restaurant putting the allergens in the menu itself. So to educate the citizens and the visitors that is actually allergy for your health. The 4 systems, we used it already. The multi-traffic light, which is actually something visual that's easy to understand, and even if you are not trying to read a single detail on it. So we use the multi-traffic lights, red, amber, and green, based on the level of or the value of product, as well as we use the stars. 1, 2, 3, 4 stars, which is actually easy to understand, to read it, and even easy to interpret it if you would like to skim the products easily. As well as we used the daily allowance cap by percent. So by 2018, the Saudi FDA called for a voluntary pledge with all of the manufacturers, local and international, private and even governmental entities, to voluntarily take part of this pledge by enhancing the front of the package labeling system. A year after, we went again to the market to see what is the benefit of it. Mm-hmm. We screened all over the market. We screened almost 4,200 companies with their products. 80 companies already used the front, because it's voluntarily, it's not mandated. So 80 companies, they used the front of package labeling system in their 120 unique products. So they used it, and we reviewed it as a Saudi FDA. We ended up with the good results. The majority went to light, traffic light, which is easier. And even the daily allowance is actually one of the systems that's being used, as well as the stars, which is actually user-friendly and easy to read. Still, we did not reach to the good compliance for the 4,000 companies, okay. But still, we are on the map now, in the route. The good thing that now we are trying to mandate this.
Sure.
The discussion is when to mandate it.
Okay, I mean, clearly you're following evidence-based policies, you've had good uptake. The question really is, have you noticed any tangible benefits in terms of population health?
We can first, we say, the orientation. It's a tangible, frankly speaking. The orientation of the population now, every single, even we, as a person here, if you have a can of Pepsi, the first thing that you look at it, read it. So the awareness is one good thing that actually we are in the way to publishing a paper to make sure that is there a clinical benefits of it or not. Yeah. Still the sample for 80, it's not that much, and still it's voluntarily. So we are on the way to read it and to analyze it and to see the outcomes of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Dame Sally Davies, in your role as Chief Medical Officer of England, you were prominent in working on combating childhood obesity. Children don't read nutritional labels because they're not shopping, they're not buying the food that they consume. And there will be other people who don't see the label because they don't buy the food that they consume. So what other policy interventions should we consider to steer children in particular towards healthier options?
Thank you. It's lovely to be in Qatar again, so I appreciate the invitation. I think one of the most difficult things about this is there's no, at least for politicians, but for most of us, is there's no magic bullet. So we have to do a lot of things that make a bit of a difference, and front of package labelling is one very good thing. But children get their intake from sweets, snacks, drinks, as well as food. Food is generally bought by mothers. The Mexican experience was that the mothers determined what was in the food, or school food. So you have to look at it from that perspective. But, you know, when children go with their parents to shops, or they go on their own with a little bit of pocket money, then how accessible and easy are the unhealthy things? We put in place a sugar levy on carbonated drinks, and we found that the calorie consumption went down while the sales went up 10%. So you can do things like that. I would dearly love to see an experiment where these carbonated drinks had standardized packaging, like cigarettes, and see if that impacted, because as you said, brand loyalty matters. But we've got to think about different ways, and brand loyalty really matters. I mean, we worried about the way that some of these companies sell their fattening products and unhealthy products using cartoons on not only the web but on Facebook and TikTok that children access, and that draws them in. So I think there are many things we're going to have to do.
Okay, thank you. Actually, you're leading me into the first question I want to ask the whole panel. I'll ask you first, actually, Professor Davis, which is that the food and beverage industry has historically, and we know there's evidence of this, opposed front of packaging labelling systems. How can governments, I mean, perhaps you could speak from example, and policymakers ensure that industry efforts do not derail important progress in this area?
Well, we have to be straightforward with them. If they want to market, then they have to make sure that it is healthy. And I think that with the front of pack labelling, what we're doing is giving people, once they've had some education, as you've been saying, a choice, and we hope that they'll shift not from buying a sandwich, but from the less healthy to the more healthy, and that will shift the market. But they have to work with us, and so that's discussion, but in the end, they have to know that we will regulate if they won't work with us. But the sugar levy is a really nice example, because sales went up 10%. So they didn't lose out, they reformulated so the calories went down.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to address that? Dr. Lewis.
Just would like to follow up on that comment, because I think that we should expect that the industry will react to this. They have an interest, they want to make profit. However, front of the pack labeling can trigger reformulation, and that is critical. From experience in some countries, I will talk about the experience of Mexico that I'm familiar with. Many businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, for example, didn't know that their products were that terrible, for example. So when they were faced and they have to do this labeling, they were shocked. And many of them sought advice to reformulate, create better products. And actually, that's good. That's a good incentive for people. Some people actually want to do some positive things here. So first, don't put the industry in the same basket. Not all of them are difficult, but you make sure, you need to ensure that you engage all sectors and have different strategies for the different size of a profit.
Great, thank you. So I'll go to Dr. Al-Jabouri and then Dr. Damady. Could you keep your answers short, please, because I'd like to take questions from the audience. Yeah. Dr. Al-Jabouri.
I think all of these comments are very valuable, and I think education has been a really key component that we're all saying it's really important to educate and to make aware. And Dame Sally brought up a very good example of the tobacco and what we did with tobacco. And some of us are old enough to remember the early 90s and the 80s where, you know, there was Joe the Camel that was the cartoon that was advertising cigarettes. And once we tackled that in the tobacco industry, we saw that that made a difference. And we can do the same thing as when we're using these cartoons and young characters to promote less healthy choices. The other thing is we've noticed that there's a real discrepancy in the cost of food. The healthier items tend to be more expensive than the unhealthy items. And this is where you're also seeing a discrepancy in non-communicable diseases between, for lack of a better word, the poor and the rich. And so maybe what we need to do as well is look at promoting, and as a government, subsidizing a little bit of the healthy foods and taxing of the unhealthy foods, and that might even out the playing ground a little bit, so that those who are able to afford healthy food choices, and we're kind of pushed to make the right decisions. And there's also less of a discrepancy when it comes to affording good choices.
Thank you. Dr. Al-Damadi.
The last comment, I would add actually, we need the language of the outcomes. So now we are speaking to a population. So our language need to be understandable. We need to get the results. We need the scientists now to publish, to read, to analyze, but we don't need them to have like a gap between their publications and the population. So we need it in a lay language, understandable. Everything will understandable from the pediatrics to the adults to even geriatricians. So we need to make sure that the messages will be clearly stated to them. So they are aware. The company is limited, and they are aware, and they know exactly what is the benefit of not to have high intake of sugar, salt, and fatty acid and other.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to take questions from the audience. Any questions, please? Got a question at the front, then a question there. So we'll bring a microphone to you, sir. Do we have a microphone? No, it's coming. It's coming. Here at the front, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Ahmed bin Nasser from Saudi Arabia. One question, it was brought up a couple of times, the tobacco and the experience with the tobacco. So my question goes about two things. One, the lessons learned with regards to the packaging, because you've mentioned there are different schemes that we can apply, whether it's the light or the stars and so on. So does a red light really, is it going to prevent more than those, the pictures of cancers and so on? Will it be as effective? So what have we learned? Number two, with the tobacco industry, we've assigned regulations where it's hidden, when it's not visually easy. Can the same thing be done where what's close to the cashier, the high point areas, those cheap, the low quality food, poor nutrient, can it be banned from these areas and put in somewhere else? Just to learn from the lessons of tobacco. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Who'd like to take that?
So I'll
Professor
start.
Davis. Yeah.
Yes, we've moved sweets away from the checkout. You can mandate, regulate where things are in stores. There's quite a lot of behavioral economics about where you want things that are healthy and unhealthy things. So that's a good start.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that? The question around different types of graphic images and the way the...
Yeah, sure. I mean, you bring up excellent points. Those were all very good points. And yes, you can put the less healthy things on the higher of the shelf or not at the checkout counter, and a lot of places have done that. As far as the red light versus other schemes, the idea behind that is that stop signs sometimes is enough to say, oh, okay, I need to take a second look, versus maybe a lot of information that is provided on the front that then you don't know how to kind of process that. So you want something, when you're grabbing a bag of crisps or chips or a candy bar or a sugary soda, you're not necessarily going to grab it and sit there and try to decipher all of the things that are happening on the front of that package. You want something that's going to be easy to understand and give you a second thought, and that's where that comes in. And it's the same that when you see the cigarette package that says cigarettes kill or whatever. It's something that's quick and easy to understand and forces you to take a second look before making that purchase. And these are all just incentives to try to have people make a better decision. So they're, not necessarily, a lot of people talk about mandates, but you're just putting things out there to help people make the right decisions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One more answer, then we'll take more questions. keep it brief.
I think that this is a combination of strategies. Our choices in behavioral economics are mostly driven by three things: information, pricing, and positioning of the foods in the markets. So we have to ensure that structurally we provide the right structure for people to make the healthier choices. Also, reduce, incentivize healthier foods and tax on healthy foods. And third, ensure that there are labeling schemes that are understandable at the packaging level, but also probably at the menu level.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to try and take 3 questions in one go, and then we'll come back to the panel. Did you have a question? Yeah. Could you try and keep your questions brief, please?
Yeah, building on the same question, I was basically, how long did it take people to accept the message for cigarettes? There was a mistrust that people did not really believe that cigarettes kill. So the same problem comes now. For example, you have recommendations about fat, and there are lots of people who have different opinions about fat, whether it's healthy or it's not healthy. So should the government, I mean, I don't know how you will balance this, how you will solve this. I mean, there are things that are obvious, but there are issues that are not. So how do you, what are the limits for government intervention in our food habits?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lady on my right here, and then we'll go to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Hanan Abdurrahim. I'm from Qatar University. So I also want to pick up again on the point that my colleague made about the tobacco industry versus the food industry. And it seems to me like you have a more difficult job, because with tobacco, there is no good tobacco, right? Whereas with food, if you approach it, even with the slightest mistake, you risk distorting people's relationship with food. So it's a much more, I think, nuanced and difficult approach. And the question here is, does that make you lean more towards, for example, reformulation? Or do you think that you have to deal with the industry, the food industry, similarly or differently to the tobacco industry?
Thank you very much. And the third question, lady in the middle of the 4th row, 5th row.
Hi, good afternoon. So my question is about the word healthy when we talk about healthy food. So I think as people are more aware of or more interested in being healthy, we understand that it's not as simple as junk food versus healthy food. And even within healthy food, there's a lot of there's differences in the quality of even vegetables, for example, like GMO or like hormones in meat and so on. So I just want to get your thoughts on that, and also I want to ask. Is there like a plan or a scheme to keep evaluating what you mean by healthy, so that then when governments kind of have plans to address it, they, it's dynamic. They keep changing it based on like a dynamic understanding of what healthy is.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, if I can summarize, there's a question around how long before the tobacco intervention starts having an impact. The second point was, I think, a fair one around complexity. I mean, from tobacco to lung cancer, there's quite a clear sort of pathway. It's not a bit more complex with food, and then building on that, what is healthy food? So who would like to go first? Professor Davies, you look ready to take those questions.
It took 50 years for tobacco.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree. There is a direct link, and with the heart disease and various other things, cancer of the bowel. So we have to look at this differently, because we all need food and water, and that's why it is better to work with people and talk about more healthy. And there's nothing wrong with the odd sweet for children as a treat. It is about finding that balance and working together. Measuring children on a regular basis and feeding back what's going on can be helpful, we have found, as long as you use the right words, because that opens families' eyes to what is healthy and what isn't. I've stopped calling for normal-sized children, because normal-sized in Britain is now oversized and unhealthy.
Yeah. Dr. Lewis.
I know that we are running out of time. I will take the healthy one. it's considered that the diet is the one that is healthy, the combination of foods. However, foods can have an adequate nutritional profile. And I will, and there are criteria for that as per the different categories of foods. The nutritional profile is available at the WHO website if you want to look at it. I want to say that, well, I will pass it to you. I'm looking at this.
No, that's fine. Would you like to comment on that?
I'll just quickly say,
Yeah.
so that Dr. Faisal can get a word in, is that these points are all very valid, and also, yes, it is more complicated because, you know, and olive oil is a perfect example of that, right? If we were labeling something as high in fat, obviously it's going to come out as unhealthy. But it's a much more complex evaluation, and this is where education and awareness and the balance of it all comes in. And as my niece likes to say, my 7-year-old niece, she says, Auntie, is this a sometime food or is this an always food? And this is, you know, making these aware choices so that we know how to make these decisions, and that's what this education kind of campaign is about.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move to a final question to all the panel, and brief answers, please. So, in addition to implementing a front of packaging labelling system, bringing it back to Qatar now, what other supporting policies might Qatar consider in order to reverse the current trends in obesity among its population? So what other interventions should a country like Qatar be considering? Dr. Luz.
I have been working with the government of Qatar, with the public health ministry for the last year. And I would say that I'm impressed first with the level of thinking and consideration that they are giving to all these policies. They clearly are going through a thorough process. At this point, Qatar has policies, for example, for the elimination of trans fatty acids from the supply chain. It's not for obesity directly, but for prevention of cardiovascular disease. They have a stoplight system for cafeterias, for example. Clearly they are trying to introduce nudges, for example, in the schools or for healthier choices. And now one of the projects that we have is also how to ensure, for example, in the context of the World Cup, how we are working to ensure that the offer is healthier. So Qatar, I think that is on the right track to ensure that policies are addressing obesity.
Thank you. Dr. Al-Jabouri.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, it's not just about diet, right? So this is a holistic approach to try and combat obesity, overweight, and non-communicable diseases and the relation between those. So, for example, you know, His Highness Sheikh Tamim put Sports Day as a national sports day. That is a huge effort in trying to change the culture around healthy living. So part of it is exercise and the way that we live, part of it is food. But it's going to be a multidiscipline and a multi-pronged effort to get to where we want to be. And front of package food labeling is just one part of this big picture.
It's a complex intervention is what you're saying. Dr. Al-Damadi, final word?
One final comment. Yes, I do agree with all of the comments of our panelists that we should, even Qatar should concentrate now on their pre and post model, making sure before they implement the front of package model to make sure that there is a good outcomes and how can we measure it, and integrate it with other systems like exercise medicine, one of the best models that actually implemented here in Qatar. So we might even integrate the exercise medicine with healthy diets, and so integrating a system would have good results.
Thank you. Finally, Professor Davis.
So, of course, I agree. One other thing is polling in Britain shows that parents think that the government has a role in protecting their children from developing obesity. It's quite strong, the polling. So child measurement is a good way of waking up that responsibility in the families and them asking government to help them.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're at full time for our session, but it's clear that labelling is a good thing. It helps you on the pathway to improving population health. We need better evidence to demonstrate that clearly. Wait for WHO's best buys to come along. We can learn from tobacco, but clearly this is a much more complex area to tackle, and it requires a multi-pronged, multi-layered intervention. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panel, Dr. Ghida Al-Jabouri, Dr. Faisal Damadi, Dr. Luz Maria de Regel, and Professor Dame Sally Davis. Thank you all very much.